the weight of unlived life, how to finally let go. Right now, there is a heavy, pulling down drag located just behind your solar plexus, a specific kind of internal steering fatigue that comes from navigating a life that feels entirely off course. It is the quiet weight of an unlived life, the invisible architecture of old plans, faded timelines, and the exhausting habit of comparing the room you are currently sitting in with the destination you were supposed to reach by now. Perhaps you are lying awake because your mind is trying to reconcile the immense distance between the person you intended to become and the quiet, tired reality of who you are tonight. This is not ordinary restlessness. It is the deep, aching friction of a heart that feels it has fallen behind its own schedule, mourning opportunities that dissolved before they could be grasped, and carrying the silent shame of unfulfilled potential into the dark. In this quiet space, the immediate world around you is slowly shifting its posture. The air in your room has begun to cool, taking on the dense, still quality of late evening as the heavy timber of the floorboards settles into place. Outside, a damp evening mist is flattening itself against the window pane, deadening the distant occasional sounds of the modern world until the space around your bed feels entirely self-contained. The fabric covering your shoulders carries a gentle, unhurried weight, while the surface beneath your back supports you without asking for any justification or proof of your achievements. There are no metrics to meet within these four walls, no ledges to climb, and no broken timelines that require your immediate intervention. You are not broken, dear friend. What you are feeling right now is not a symptom of personal failure, nor is it proof that you have taken a wrong turn in the dark. The immense exhaustion you carry is simply the natural response of a spirit that has been rowing upstream against the current of its own expectations for far too long. Tonight, we are not going to force the mind to be silent, nor will we demand that you banish these heavy thoughts from your awareness. We will not treat your regret as an enemy that must be conquered, or your unfulfilled dreams as mistakes that must be erased before you are allowed to rest. Instead, we are going to change the way your awareness holds this heavy weight, learning how to look at the landscape of your life without using an imagined journey as a weapon against the ground your feet are actually touching. There is a profound, surprising insight within the ancient lineage of Buddhist wisdom that addresses this very ache. The mind does not become heavy because your life path has been uneven, nor does it suffer because certain doors remained closed to you. The true cause of your internal exhaustion lies in a subtle, paradoxical habit. We tend to carry the heavy silt of our past expectations into the shallow, quiet waters of the present moment, jamming the very mechanism that allows us to move forward. We overthink our unlived potential because fear convinces us that if we analyze our perceived missteps long enough, we can somehow force the current of time to flow backward and correct itself. But overthinking is not wisdom, it is simply the heart's defense mechanism, a desperate attempt to maintain control over a narrative that has already been written by reality. Maybe you have felt this too, during those long, dark hours when the world goes quiet, but your thoughts continue to race through old conversations, missed turning points, and the painful question of where everything began to diverge from your grand design. If it feels right, allow a slow breath to fill the spaces around your ribs, noticing the gentle rise of your chest and the way the air naturally leaves your body without your assistance. You do not need to force anything into a state of perfection right now, and absolutely nothing is required of you before the sun rises. The trajectory of your years, the state of your finances, the standing of your relationships, all of these things can exist exactly as they are right now without your active management. You are safe enough to soften the rigid defenses that have kept your nervous system on high alert throughout the day. When we carry the heavy blueprints of a life we did not get to live, our internal world begins to resemble an old wooden waterwheel whose paddles have become entirely impacted with thick, wet river sediment. A waterwheel is designed to be an open channel, a beautifully simple structure that receives the water as it arrives, allows the weight of that water to turn its frame, and then releases the liquid back into the stream so it can receive the next drop. It is a movement of continuous presence, an unhindered conversation between the wood and the current. But when a severe storm passes through the valley, The riverbed churns, throwing up dark sand, heavy clay, and ancient debris from miles upstream. If the wheel attempts to scoop up every piece of that heavy sediment, storing it deep within its wooden buckets rather than letting it wash through, the wheel becomes too heavy for the river to move. It jams, staying perfectly frozen in place while the clear water of the present moment glides harmlessly over its stuck slats. Your mind, in its habit of constant comparison, has been scooping up the heavy silt of what might have been, packing it tightly into the chambers of your heart until the current of tonight feels insufficient to move you. You look at where you are, and the wheel feels immovable, not because you lack inner strength, but because you are asking yourself to turn under the weight of 10 years of accumulated expectations. The suffering you feel is the pressure of that stuck wood, the internal tension of trying to force a silt-clogged mind to spin freely while it remains anchored to an idealized past. Let yourself notice that tension without judging it as a flaw. The habit of holding on to unfulfilled potential is merely a misplaced form of care, a way the heart tries to protect itself from the pain of unpredictability. But tonight, that care can take a different, softer form. In a moment, we will explore an ancient, quiet place where the nature of this weight becomes visible through a different lens, showing us how a jammed structure can learn to clear its own channels without any struggle at all. For now, let your awareness rest within the simple, unrefined reality of your physical body, allowing the heavy, pulling sensation behind your solar plexus to be exactly as it is, fully supported by the darkness of the room. Down in the low-lying, damp marshland valley where an old irrigation canal met a shallow reed, the air always smelled of wet river moss and cold turnings of earth. It was a place where the water lost its mountain velocity, widening out into sluggish, brown channels that fed the lower terraced fields. In this valley lived a young man named Tokusen, whose task was to maintain the wooden sluice gates that regulated the flow to the crops. For 3 seasons, however, Tokusen had carried an internal heaviness that made his arms feel leaden and his sleep thin. Years before, he had been chosen to study the art of building stone bridges in the capital, a position of great prestige that would have secured his family's lineage. But a sudden, unseasonal winter freeze had ruined his family's harvest, forcing him to return to the wet lowlands to labor in the mud, leaving his architectural drawings to rot in a damp chest. Every evening, as the mist crept through the reeds like smoke, Tokusen would stand by the main canal, watching the water and replaying the exact sequence of events that had brought him back to the valley. He would track the days he had lost, the choices he wished he had made differently, and the imagined bridges he should have been building across deep mountain chasms. His mind was constantly constructing those unleaved stone arches, comparing their magnificent, clean lines with the unadorned timber gates he was forced to slide into the mud every morning. The more he compared his actual life with the one he had lost, the more the current of his daily existence felt like an insult, a stagnant pool that was slowly swallowing his youth without purpose. Near the western edge of the reed, where the canal narrowed into a dark culvert, stood a small wooden workshop belonging to Master Bankai. Bankai was an old, partially deaf temple carpenter who had spent 40 years repairing the small river dams and wooden flumes that kept the valley from drowning during the spring thaws. He was a man who rarely spoke, his hands permanently calloused and stained a dark gray from decades of handling waterlogged pine. He moved with a slow, deliberate limp, completely unbothered by the damp cold that made younger men complain. Tokusen often watched him from a distance, wondering how an old man could spend his entire life poking at rotting wood in a forgotten swamp, while the rest of the world built monuments in the high cities. One evening, after a day of heavy gray drizzle, the main waterwheel that lifted water into the highest terrace ground to a complete halt. The wooden framework did not creak, it simply froze, its high paddles suspended mid-turn while the river piled up behind it in an angry, swirling pool. Tokusan spent hours trying to force the structure to move. He wedged his shoulder against the central axle, straining until the skin on his back burned and his sandals slipped in the slick clay. But the timber refused to budge even an inch. As the twilight deepened into a cold purple dark, Bankai came limping along the muddy dike, carrying a single, primitive tool across his shoulder. A split pine water scoop with a long, unpolished handle, its blade hollowed out and blackened by years of clearing muck. The old carpenter did not offer to help Tokusan push. Instead, he sat down on a wet cedar stump by the edge of the canal, laid the split pine scoop across his knees, and watched the young man strain against the immovable wood. The only sound in the entire valley was the low gurgle of shallow water passing through the outer wood slats, and the frantic, heavy gasps of Tokusan's breath. After another futile attempt that left the young man kneeling in the cold mud, Bankei reached out with his foot and gently tapped the frozen rim of the waterwheel with his worn wooden clog. Bankei looked at the suspended paddles, then leaned forward, his clear, unblinking eyes reflecting the dull gray light of the evening sky. He did not look at Tokusan's face. He kept his gaze fixed on the lowest bucket of the wheel, which was submerged in the dark, swirling current with a slow, unhurried motion. The old man dipped his split pine scoop into the submerged bucket, bringing up a heavy, glistening mound of dark river sediment mixed with decayed leaves, coarse gravel, and thick prehistoric blue clay from the bottom of the channel. He dumped the muck onto the grass with a wet, heavy thud, then dipped the scoop back into the same bucket, bringing up another load of heavy silt. Tokusan watched him, his patience thinning from exhaustion. He told the old master that the wheel was jammed from the outside, that the river was simply too sluggish to turn such a large frame, and that they needed to build a higher dam upstream to force the water to hit the paddles with more violence. Bankei did not look up from his work. He continued to dip the split pine scoop into the dark water, systematically clearing the packed sediment from the deep wooden pockets of the wheel. He worked in absolute silence for half an hour, his movements rhythmic and steady, until he had cleared 5 of the lower buckets, creating a small hill of dark sand on the bank. When the 6th bucket was empty, Bankei laid the pine scoop down in the mud and stood up. He did not use his strength to push the wheel. He simply took a slow step backward and folded his hands inside his sleeves. For a few moments, nothing happened. The valley remained perfectly still, wrapped in its blanket of wet moss and evening chill. But then, as the shallow river current pressed against the newly lightened wood, a deep, hollow groan echoed through the timber. The main axle shifted. A small stream of clear water trickled through the cleared slats, and with a heavy, majestic splash, the waterwheel dropped its lower paddle and began to spin on its own, turning effortlessly in the very same current that had just felt stagnant and weak. Bankei reached down and picked up the split pine water scoop, turning its hollow blade over in his hand so Tokusan could see the smooth, clean grain of the wood beneath the dark river stains. The old master looked at the spinning wheel, then pointed the handle of the scoop directly at the young man's chest. He asked Tokusan if he truly believed the river was his enemy, or if he had simply forgotten that an empty bucket is the only thing a current can move. In that quiet moment, standing in the gray twilight with the cold mud drying on his skin, something shifted deep within Tokusan's chest. The sound of the spinning wood and the rhythmic splash of the clear water filling the upper flume seemed to cut through the long, internal monologue he had carried for 3 seasons. He looked at the hill of dark silt Bankei had pulled from the wheel, and he recognized the exact weight he had been carrying behind his own solar plexus. The jam was not in his life, it was not in the valley, nor was it in the unseasonal freeze that had broken his early dreams. The jam was the heavy, wet sediment of his own unlived expectations, packed so tightly into the chambers of his mind that the clear, quiet current of his actual life could no longer find an open space to move him. The old carpenter turned and began his slow, limping walk back toward his small workshop, his split pine scoop swinging gently at his side, leaving Tokusan alone with the spinning wood. In a moment, this old story will show us something even quieter about the nature of your own internal fatigue. But for now, let that image of the turning wheel rest within your thoughts, noticing how the water does not fight the wood, it simply waits for the wood to become empty enough to receive it. This old story of the silt-clogged water wheel is not telling us to stop feeling our disappointments, nor is it asking us to become cold and indifferent to the genuine losses we encounter along our path. It is not an invitation to flatten your emotions or pretend that the collapse of a deeply cherished dream does not bring a real, aching sorrow to the heart. Buddhist wisdom does not demand that you look at the unrendered blueprints of your life and feel nothing but empty compliance. Instead, it is pointing us towards something much quieter, a deeper understanding of how our own internal architecture handles the debris of our experiences. It is showing us that the primary source of our exhaustion is rarely the difficult event itself, but rather the way the mind stubbornly holds on to what happened long after the river has moved on. When we look closely at this internal fatigue, we can see how we inadvertently add a second wound to the first. The first wound is simply what life brings: the unseasonal frost, the sudden economic shift, the closed door, or the natural ending of a chapter we were not ready to finish. This first pain is clean, an unavoidable part of navigating a world that operates on its own vast, unpredictable timeline. But the second wound is the one we inflict upon ourselves in the dark hours of the night. It is the heavy layer of self-judgment that insists we should have been smarter, that we have somehow broken our own destiny, or that our current ordinary existence is an insult to our potential. This second wound is the thick, wet sediment that we scoop up and pack into our own wooden buckets, turning a temporary delay into a permanent internal paralysis. What we often call attachment in our modern lives is not a beautiful expression of care. It is the tight, suffocating grip that says, "My life must look exactly like my blueprint," or "I cannot allow my heart to be at peace." It is the frantic insistence that the river must conform to our personal design, rather than allowing our design to respond to the river. When we fall into this pattern, our longings turn into a desperate kind of craving, a chronic emotional hunger that transforms the simple, quiet reality of the present moment into an enemy. We look at the room we are sitting in, the income we possess, or the solitary space we occupy, and we see them as personal failures because they do not match the gilded images we constructed years ago. We treat our actual life as a waiting room, a temporary purgatory we must tolerate until we can somehow force the world to give us back our unlived dreams. But the great insight of this tradition reminds us that nothing in this world stays fixed in a single form, and that our resistance to this fluid reality is what creates the heavy friction in our chests. The seasons shift, economies fluctuate, and the human body moves through its own natural cycles of energy and rest. When we practice a gentle kind of mindfulness, we are not trying to achieve a state of blank emptiness or forced positivity. We are simply developing the capacity to see a passing thought, even a thought of profound regret, without immediately jumping into it and allowing it to drag us down to the bottom of the riverbed. We learn to observe the heavy sediment of our old expectations as an event passing through our awareness, rather than treating it as the absolute truth of who we are. Letting go, when understood through this lens, is never an act of violent rejection or cowardly abandonment. It does not mean you stop caring about your life, or that you must erase the memory of the beautiful bridges you once hoped to build. True letting go is simply the brave act of releasing the extra struggle. It is the choice to lay down the split pine scoop, to stop digging through the mud of 10 winters ago, and to allow the heavy, packed sand of your old metrics to wash out through the open slats of your mind. It is the realization that your spirit does not need to be validated by a specific title, a certain relationship, or an idealized timeline to possess its own native dignity right now. This spacious quality of awareness is like a deep, dark basin of water that remains completely undisturbed by whatever debris floats across its surface. The basin does not fight the leaf that falls into it, nor does it try to hold on to the reflection of the passing cloud. It simply provides the space for all things to appear, exist, and dissolve in their own time. When you rest in this quiet space, you begin to experience a profound sense of compassion for yourself. This compassion is not a soft sentimentality. It is the immense grounded strength to meet your own disappointed heart without turning that disappointment into self-hatred. It is the willingness to look at your tired reflection and say, "You have been carrying a heavy, jammed wheel for so long, and it is safe to empty your buckets tonight." Slowly, the ancient teaching becomes deeply personal as you lie here in the stillness of your room. You begin to see that the life you are currently living is not a compromise or a broken fragment of a better path. It is the only ground that is real. The river of your days is still flowing, completely unbothered by the fact that your wheel stopped turning for a season. The water is still clear, still cool, and still perfectly capable of moving you the moment you allow your thoughts to become empty enough to receive its pressure. In a moment, we will explore how to bring this softening directly into your own body, allowing the current of your breath to do the work that your straining mind could never accomplish. For now, let the heavy contrast between what is and what should be dissolve into the quiet, dark space around your bed, knowing that the river requires no performance from you tonight. If it feels right, let your awareness slide downward into the physical space your body occupies, allowing yourself to notice the exact points of contact where the physical world supports you. There is no need to change your posture or adjust your breath with any kind of rigorous discipline. Perhaps you might simply observe the natural, involuntary rise and fall of your chest. With each soft exhalation, you might allow the muscles across the back of your neck and the wide spaces of your shoulder blades to settle a fraction deeper into the surface beneath you. You are not trying to reach an altered state of consciousness, nor are you required to demonstrate perfect meditative focus tonight. Even noticing the subtle weight of your own collarbones as they expand and drop with the air is entirely enough to begin softening the internal machinery. Right now, you might choose to bring your internal gaze to that quiet, pulling sensation that has been lingering behind your solar plexus throughout the evening. Do not try to dissolve it with sheer willpower, and do not treat it as an intruder that must be evicted before you can experience a sense of inner safety. Instead, look at it with a soft, non-judgmental curiosity, the way an old carpenter might examine a weathered piece of timber pulled from a quiet riverbank. Notice if there is a specific thought attached to this physical weight, perhaps an image of a path you didn't get to walk, a memory of a year that felt like a turning point, or a lingering sense of disappointment regarding a plan that left you feeling stranded. As you observe this thought drifting through your awareness, you can gently name the emotional pattern without adding any layer of prosecutorial evaluation to it. You might silently whisper to yourself that this is simply the mind's habit of collecting heavy silt, the old conditioning that desperately tries to build an idealized monument out of things that have already passed. There is an immense, unhurried freedom in simply recognizing the pattern for what it is, rather than letting it control the temperature of your body. You are merely witnessing a deeply ingrained human habit, a protective reflex that has outlived its usefulness for the night. If it feels right, imagine yourself standing by that slow, dark river canal we visited earlier, where the damp evening air smells of wet moss and the water moves with an ancient, patient rhythm. Picture your own internal landscape as that large, wooden waterwheel resting quietly in the shallows. See the deep, slatted buckets of the wheel, and notice how they have become packed with the dark, heavy sediment of your old expectations, holding the entire structure frozen mid-turn. See the wet clay of past choices, the coarse sand of comparative lack, and the dense silt of unlived timelines wedged deep into the wood. Now, instead of using your remaining energy to push against that massive timber axle, you might simply choose to let the natural current of your breath act as the rinsing water. Imagine a cool, clear flow of water gently entering the lowest buckets of the wheel with every inhalation you take. There is absolutely no need to force this imagery, and there is no pressure to witness a sudden, dramatic catharsis. You are not required to clear a decade of accumulated regret in a single evening. You can simply watch as the water softly eddies around the hard, impacted sediment, loosening its grip grain by grain. With every slow, unhurried breath that leaves your body, picture that dark river silt naturally dissolving, slipping through the open gaps between the wooden slats, and sliding back down into the deep, quiet riverbed where it belongs. Watch as the weight of those old plans becomes lighter, not because you fought them, but because you allowed the simple presence of the current to wash through the compartments of your mind. The water does not argue with the clay, it does not demand an apology from the sediment, it simply occupies the space, allowing its own natural fluidity to carry the heavy matter away into the vast, dark distance. Perhaps you can feel a subtle change in the internal imagery as the buckets begin to empty themselves of their historical weight. The wood of the wheel becomes lighter, taking on a buoyant, responsive quality as it rests in the moving water. There is no longer an urgent need to force a transformation or guarantee a perfect tomorrow before you are allowed to rest. You can return to this simple, open space whenever you are ready, knowing that the clearing of your inner channels is a process that operates on its own quiet, organic timeline. What happens within your body when you stop treating your actual life as a mistake that needs to be fixed by your thoughts? Could it be that the peace you have been searching for is not located at the end of an idealized destination, but is quietly breathing beneath the very weight you have been trying to steer? Let your mind rest loosely within the unrefined texture of this moment, allowing any remaining thoughts of failure to float harmlessly across your awareness like dry leaves passing over a dark basin. In a moment, our journey will take us deeper into a wider water, where the river meets a vast, silent estuary, revealing a different kind of transformation that requires no steering at all. For now, let your breath continue its quiet, rhythmic rinsing, fully supported by the darkness of your room. Further down the plain, miles away from the small irrigation canals, the river completely lost its narrow boundaries and opened into a slow, flat-water estuary here. The water no longer moved with the audible splash of mountain streams. It drifted in massive, silent sheets, its surface so dark and glossy that it looked like polished obsidian under the evening sky. In this wide delta, where the fresh mountain current naturally dissolved into the salty tide of the Great Sea, lived an old river ferry worker named Shisetsu. Shisetsu had spent his later years operating a simple wooden flatboat, guiding travelers across the marshy channels. He had lost his vision in one eye from an old shipyard accident decades ago, a physical limitation that gave his face an asymmetrical, permanently tilted appearance, as if he were always listening to a sound that others could not hear. One chilly autumn evening, a traveler named Kyuzo arrived at the estuary dock. Kyuzo was an educated man from the northern provinces, but his posture was bent, and his fingers were constantly twitching against the hem of his traveling coat. For 7 years, Kyuzo had been consumed by an intense, burning resentment over a broken partnership that had stripped him of his inheritance and forced him into a life of nomadic clerkship. He spent his days carrying a small leather ledger in his vest, filled with precise calculations of the wealth he should have accumulated, the estates he should have owned, and the social standing he had been denied by the treachery of others. His mind was a hypervigilant court of law, continuously putting his past associates on trial, rehearsing arguments that would never be spoken, and measuring his current poverty against the ghost of his stolen prosperity. As Shisetsu untied the heavy hemp mooring rope from the wooden piling, Kyuzo stepped onto the damp deck of the flatboat, his boots making a hollow clicking sound against the gray planks. The air was thick with the sharp smell of brine, decaying seagrass, and cool evening mist rising from the reedy banks. Kyuzo began to speak to the old ferryman, his voice tight and trembling with an old, familiar urgency. He complained about the slow pace of the water, the damp cold that seeped into his bones, and the unfairness of a world that forced a man of his intellect to travel on a crude wooden raft, while lesser men rode in gilded carriages through the capital. He pulled out his leather ledger, pointing to the columns of numbers in the dim twilight, desperately seeking validation for the immense injustice of his life path. Shisetsu did not answer, nor did he push against the current with any visible strain. He stood at the stern of the flatboat, his single clear eye fixed on a massive uncarved willow timber that was floating in a sluggish eddy near the center of the estuary. The timber was a raw trunk, rough-barked and bloated with river water, completely unshaped by any carpenter's adze. It had been left there to season in the brackish water, bobbing weightlessly between the fresh current and the incoming tide, moving an inch to the left, then an inch to the right, yet remaining entirely anchored by its own dense volume. The wind began to rise from the open sea, driving cold, choppy waves against the side of the flatboat, causing the wooden planks to tilt sharply. Kyuzo gasped, dropping his leather ledger onto the wet deck, where the brackish water instantly began to smear the fine ink characters he had spent years recorded. He scrambled to his knees, his hands shaking as he tried to wipe the mud from the pages, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He cried out to Shisetsu that everything was being ruined, that his entire history was dissolving in the water. and he demanded that the ferryman steer the boat faster to save his belongings from the rising tide. The old ferryman did not rush to the bow, nor did he offer words of empty reassurance. Instead, he took a single slow breath, letting his chest expand fully against his rough wool vest before he made any movement at all. He reached down with his calloused hand, picked up the wet leather ledger from the deck, and without checking the numbers, he placed it gently back into Kyuzo's trembling hands. Then, Shisetsu pointed his long steering oar toward the uncarved willow timber floating in the dark water nearby. Shisetsu spoke in a low, raspy voice that carried the steady cadence of the tide. He observed that the willow timber had been cut from its original bank seasons ago, stripped of its branches, and thrown into a current it did not choose. Yet, the wood did not spend its days calculating how much taller it should have grown on the mountain, nor did it break its own fibers trying to swim back upstream to the forest. It simply allowed the river to occupy its open pores, becoming so heavy with the actual water of the estuary that the wind could no longer capsize it. He asked Kyuzo how much longer he would keep his own heart dry, trying to float a ghost ship made of old numbers while the real sea was already rising around his ankles. Kyuzo looked down at his ruined ledger, where the ink was now nothing more than dark, meaningless smudges on the warped paper. He looked at the uncarved willow trunk, sitting deep and immovable in the shifting tide, completely unconcerned with what it was meant to become. For 7 years, Kyuzo had believed that his anger was a form of protection, a shield that kept his dignity alive by refusing to accept his diminished reality. But as he watched the raw wood bobbing in the mist, a sudden quiet realization pierced through his long internal argument. He saw that the ledger was not a record of his value, it was the very silt that was sinking his boat. His suffering did not come from his poverty, it came from the exhausting, daily habit of treating the ghost of his past expectations as more real than the air he was breathing. With a slow, hesitant movement that felt older than the estuary itself, Kyuzo did not throw the ledger away in a dramatic gesture of false enlightenment. Instead, he simply closed the wet cover, let his hands drop to his sides, and allowed his shoulders to fall completely slack for the first time in 7 winters. He chose to sit down directly on the damp, unpainted planks of the flatboat, right next to the puddle of brackish water, stopping his frantic effort to save the pages. He did not become magically happy, nor did his past injuries vanish from his memory. The betrayal was still real, and his coat was still thin. But as he sat with the cold mist settling on his face, he stopped using his mind to fight the direction of the boat. He allowed himself to be exactly where he was, a displaced man on a silent river, moving toward an unknown shore. The flatboat glided smoothly through the reeds, its wooden hull making a soft, rhythmic shushing sound against the grass as it neared the far bank. Kyuzo closed his eyes, no longer scanning the horizon for a carriage or reviewing the text of his old grievances. He simply leaned his head against the wooden rail, letting his body absorb the slow, heavy rise and fall of the estuary water. The shift was small, almost invisible to an outside observer. But inside his chest, the steering fatigue was finally giving way to a profound, spacious stillness. In a moment, this transformation will bring us closer to the specific mechanisms of your own overthinking mind. But for now, let yourself rest within that gray delta, knowing that an uncarved life is fully permitted to float exactly where the current holds it tonight. When we look deeply into the emotional mechanism that keeps us awake at night, we can see that our suffering is rarely caused by the simple, raw facts of our lives. It is manufactured in the quiet factory of our thoughts, through a complex system of internal control, resistance, and continuous self-judgment. We experience an unexpected detour, a project that dissolves, a relationship that changes, or a timeline that breaks, and our immediate response is to treat that event as a personal indictment. We fall into the exhausting psychological habit of rehearsing the future or replaying the past, convinced that if we just scan the horizon long enough, we can protect ourselves from ever being caught off guard again. We use shame as a misguided tool for self-improvement, believing that if we punish ourselves with enough bitter thoughts, we can somehow force our lives back into the idealized shape we originally intended. Over time, this constant friction creates a dangerous kind of comfort. We begin to turn our pain into our very identity, wrapping ourselves in our grievances and our unlived potential until we no longer know who we would be without our leather ledger of losses. We become like a captain who is so terrified of an unpredictable sea that he anchors his ship in a stagnant marsh, choosing the slow rot of the hull over the uncertainty of the open water. We mistake our hypervigilance for wisdom, and we mistake our chronic worry for control. But this internal courtroom does nothing to change the texture of reality. It only packs more wet sand into our wooden buckets, making us too heavy to respond to the actual movement of the day. This is the exact junction where ancient Buddhist wisdom brings a profound, practical clarity to our modern psychological fatigue. The teachings point toward a crucial distinction between the first pain and the second pain. The first pain is the natural consequence of being a human being alive in an impermanent world. It is the sudden winter freeze that ruins the harvest. It is the unexpected rough weather that comes up from the open sea. It is the natural grief of a closed door or a missed opportunity. This first pain is unavoidable, an unpreventable part of a changing landscape that carries no personal malice towards you. It is simply the river being the river, moving according to forces that are vastly larger than our individual designs. The second pain, however, is entirely engineered by the mind's refusal to accept the first. The second pain is the long internal monologue that asks, "Why did this happen to me? What did I do wrong to deserve this detour? How can I prove to the world that I was meant for something greater than this ordinary room?" This second pain is the thick, wet river sediment that we voluntarily shovel back into our own compartments, turning a temporary delay into a lifelong paralysis. We cannot always control the first pain, because we cannot command the sky to stop raining or force other people to understand our value. But we can absolutely learn to stop feeding the second pain. We can choose to lay down our split pine scoop, refusing to spend another midnight digging through the mud of old expectations. Peace, when understood through this lens, is never the complete absence of difficulty or the magical elimination of all your problems. It is not a state of frozen perfection where nothing ever goes wrong and your bank account is always full. True peace is simply a completely different relationship with your difficulties. It is the capacity to sit on the damp planks of your actual life, right in the middle of a shifting tide, without using your thoughts to fight the direction of the current. It is the willingness to let your plans be uncarved timbers, floating deep and secure in the water, rather than demanding that every hour of your existence serve as a monument to your potential. When you step off the wheel of constant self-evaluation, you begin to see that your actual life is not a compromised fragment of a better path. It is the only ground that can actually hold your weight tonight. The room you are lying in, the breath moving through your chest, the quiet stillness of your hands, all of these ordinary things possess their own native dignity the moment you stop comparing them to an imagined blueprint. You do not need to fix yourself through shame, nor do you need to earn your right to exist by achieving a certain status before the sun rises. You can allow your nervous system to drop its armor completely, recognizing that the current of the night is fully capable of holding you without your active management. Slowly, the heavy tension behind your solar plexus begins to lose its tight, structural grip as this understanding sinks into your awareness. You see that you have merely been carrying a jammed mechanism, trying to turn under the weight of accumulated metrics that were never real. Tonight, you can let those old numbers dissolve into the dark, brackish water of the estuary, letting your awareness expand until it becomes as wide and as silent as the flat delta. In a moment, we will bring this quiet perspective closer to the specific, small adjustments of your daily life, showing you how to navigate the modern world without becoming clogged by its expectations. But for now, let yourself rest securely within the single inch of time you are currently touching, fully supported by the heavy horizontal piece of your room. Now let this quiet perspective move closer to the small, fragmented spaces of your modern daily life. The wisdom of the empty bucket and the uncarved timber is not something meant to be kept on a remote riverbank or locked away in an ancient monastery. It is a practice that unfolds in the exact moments when your day feels most cluttered. It is practiced when you are waiting for a text message that does not arrive, watching the glowing screen in the dark, and feeling that old, familiar panic tell you that you are being excluded or forgotten. It is practiced when you are lying awake at night, replaying an awkward comment you made during an afternoon meeting, or checking your phone for a brief hit of digital reassurance that never quite satisfies the deeper ache in your chest. We live in a world that operates as a loud, continuous marketplace of comparison, constantly urging us to measure our speed against the visible achievements of everyone else. You look at a peer's curated trajectory, and a sudden, sharp knot of inadequacy tightens across your upper ribs, whispering that you are falling behind, that your time is leaking away, and that you have somehow missed the primary boat. Out of fear, you might find yourself smiling warmly while feeling completely hollow inside, pretending to be perfectly fine for the benefit of coworkers or family, and then carrying that exhausting mask home into your bed. You want nothing more than to rest, yet the moment you close your eyes, a heavy sense of guilt settles over you, telling you that your rest is an unearned luxury, a personal defect that will only cause you to slip further back in the race. But the great gift of this ancient training is the realization that peace is not a massive monument you build at the end of a long career. It is a quality of attention you bring to these exact, unadorned seconds. It is the simple, revolutionary understanding that you can absolutely care deeply about your life, your work, and the people you love without gripping their outcomes so tightly that you crush your own spirit. You can participate fully in the modern world without allowing its shifting metrics to dictate the absolute value of your soul. When a sudden wave of panic arises, a single, unhurried breath taken before you answer an aggressive email or react to an unexpected delay is a profound form of internal wisdom. It is the act of stepping back from the wheel, refusing to let the current throw more sand into your channels. Within this quiet space, you begin to see that not every anxious thought that crosses your mind deserves your obedience, and not every heavy feeling is a command that requires your immediate action. When your mind begins to construct an elaborate catastrophe about next year's finances or tomorrow's obligations, you can simply observe that thought as a passing drift of gray mist. You do not have to jump into the courtroom and argue with the projection. You can look at it with a soft, spacious neutrality and say, there is the mind doing its old winter hoarding again. There is the fear pretending to protect me. By refusing to feed the second pain with your continuous analysis, the thought naturally runs out of fuel, dissolving back into the silence like a ripple on a deep basin. You are completely permitted to rest tonight without earning it through a list of completed chores or a guaranteed tomorrow. Your value as a living form is already fully established by the simple fact that you are breathing, sitting here as a necessary, unrepeatable thread in the vast fabric of the world. You do not need to possess a perfect blueprint, an immaculate bank account, or an unbroken history of flawless choices to be worthy of a soft pillow and an unburdened mind. The path your feet have actually trodden with all its sudden detours, ruined harvests, and uncarved spaces is not a broken fragment of a better destiny. It is the unique, dignified ground where your wisdom is learning how to deepen its roots. As you allow these words to sit quietly in the room, the internal pressure to perform begins to drain out through the open slats of your awareness. The heavy, pulling down drag behind your solar plexus is no longer an obstacle to your peace. It is simply a tired muscle that is finally being allowed to uncoil in the dark. You can let the day go entirely, recognizing that the modern world will continue to spin without your anxious management for the next few hours. In a moment, our journey will reach its final, deep delta, where all the remaining noise of the day dissolves completely into a weightless, unbroken rest. For now, let your body become heavy and supported, fully resting within the quiet, horizontal sanctuary of the night. The wide estuary of the mind is now perfectly still, its dark, glossy surface expanding outward into the quiet perimeter of the room. The long, intricate arguments of the daylight hours have fully spent their force, dissolving into the cool, brackish air like a handful of fine salt dropped into a deep basin. There is no longer a wheel to be turned, no heavy silt to be shoveled, and no uncarved timber that needs to be hauled ashore for inspection. The entire architecture of your old expectations is gently uncoupling itself from your awareness, leaving nothing behind but the slow, unhurried rhythm of a physical form resting securely in the horizontal dark. Let your body become completely heavy now, sinking down through the supportive layers beneath your shoulders, as if you were that raw willow timber, settling into the deep, quiet currents of the flat delta. The small muscles around your temples, the delicate hinges of your jaw, and the wide spaces between your ribs are all receiving a total, unconditional permission to go entirely slack. Your breath has become remarkably quiet, a soft, effortless movement of air that requires no guidance, no monitoring, and no conscious intervention from your thoughts. The air simply arrives, fills the empty spaces of your chest, and then glides away into the coolness of the evening, carrying the remaining grain of tomorrow's worry along with it. You are completely allowed to stop solving your life for the next few hours. The unrendered blueprints, the missed turning points, and the incomplete ledges of achievement can all rest quietly in their dark drawers without your supervision. The river of your days does not require you to maintain a state of hypervigilance. To find its way to the sea, it moves by its own ancient, organic intelligence, fully capable of sustaining your weight while you sleep. You have returned to the native sanctuary of your own unrefined presence, a spacious, self-contained home that has never been compromised by the changing metrics of the human marketplace. Listen to the absolute silence that is growing between the slow movements of your breath. The dark sand of old self-judgment is washing clean through the unblocked slats of your heart, leaving the inner channels wide, open, and clear. You do not need to be anything other than what you are right now, a quiet awareness resting in a dark room, completely free from the obligation to perform or justify your existence to the coming dawn. The day is fully resolved, the current is wide and flat, the wood is light, and the boundaries between your spirit and the quiet night are softly fading away. Let yourself slide effortlessly into the deep, unbroken stillness of a dreamless sleep, allowing your awareness to dissolve entirely into the dark, comforting expanse of the delta. What if the magnificent life you have been trying so desperately to engineer was always nothing more than a shadow, while the true sanctuary has been waiting, all along in the quiet depth of the water you are already floating upon? The water moves beneath you, a vast and fluid cradle that carries no memory of the stones it has washed over, nor any anxiety for the great ocean that lies ahead. It simply holds your weight, whispering that the depth of your presence is enough, that the simple act of floating contains all the dignity your heart has ever sought. The uncarved willow trunk does not need to justify its position in the current. It does not need to prove to the reeds or the wind that it once belonged to a magnificent forest on the mountain peak. It rests in its raw, unpolished nature, completely saturated by the actual water of the estuary, and in that saturation it finds a heavy, unshakable peace that no storm can ever disrupt. Perhaps you can feel your own mind adopting that same deep, saturated quality as you lie here in the stillness. The thoughts that were once so loud, the urgent voices demanding that you fix your past or guarantee your future, are beginning to lose their sharp, distinct outlines. They are softening into the background noise of the night, becoming nothing more than the distant occasional rustle of dry marsh grass in an evening breeze. You do not need to push those thoughts away, and you do not need to follow them into the dark corridors of old arguments. You can simply let them drift across the wide expanse of your awareness, watching them appear and dissolve, without ever letting them alter the steady, horizontal posture of your rest. This is the deeper training of the heart, the quiet, daily discipline of allowing yourself to be precisely where your feet are planted. It is the realization that your true nature has never been defined by the external metrics of success or failure, nor has it ever been broken by the sudden detours that life has forced you to take. The imagined blueprint of your life was only a map drawn by a mind that could not see the vastness of the whole river. It was a small, rigid design that tried to contain a current that is naturally meant to turn, widen, and change its shape as it finds its path. By letting that map slip out of your hands, you are not losing your way. You are finally allowing yourself to arrive at the only destination that has ever mattered, the absolute safety of your own quiet heart. Let the rhythmic movement of your breathing expand until it feels as wide as the entire delta at midnight. Each inhalation is a gentle, cool wave of presence entering your body, filling the spaces where tension used to live, and each exhalation is a deep, quiet release, a natural emptying of the wood that allows you to sit lower and more securely in the water. There is no effort in this movement, no striving to achieve a perfect state of meditation, and no pressure to heal your entire history before the sun rises. You are simply existing as a living form in a quiet room, fully supported by the ground beneath you and fully embraced by the immense, non-judgmental mercy of the night. The dark sand of your old expectations has washed clean through the open slats of your mind, leaving the internal channels wide open and clear. The machinery of your thoughts has finally gone silent, its heavy wheels resting peacefully in the dark shallows, no longer burdened by the weight of 10 winters of accumulated regret. You are an open channel now, a beautiful, unadorned structure through which the quiet energy of the world can move without any friction or resistance. You do not need to hold on to your grievances to protect your dignity, nor do you need to use shame as a weapon against your own tired spirit. You can let the whole day go, recognizing that you are safe enough to drop your final defenses and slide effortlessly into the deep, dark expanse of rest. As the silence deepens around your bed, feel the heavy, warm comfort of your body becoming completely integrated with the stillness of the room. The boundaries of your worry are dissolving into the cool air, leaving only a weightless, unburdened presence that requires no justification to exist. You are home, dear friend, in the only sanctuary that has ever been real, resting quietly in the deep delta, where the fresh water of your life naturally merges with the boundless peace of the night. There is nothing left to steer, nothing left to calculate, and absolutely nothing left to solve. Let yourself drift away into the heavy horizontal peace of an unbroken sleep, fully trusting the current to hold you exactly as you are. The water remains deep beneath the hull, a dark, immovable floor that holds you up without demanding that you account for where you have been or how fast you have traveled. It is a presence that does not keep a record of empty seasons or unfinished structures, matching its pace perfectly to the heavy stillness that has settled over your eyes. In this vast delta, the uncarved timber rests completely undisturbed by the wind, sitting low and stable in the salting dark, content to be exactly what it is: wood floating in the water, entirely decoupled from the need to become a pillar or a monument. It has surrendered the burden of its potential, and in that surrender, the river has become its perfect sanctuary, a home that requires no internal navigation or constant defense against the sky. Let your mind mirror that heavy, saturated timber as you lie here in the deep of the night, the lingering echoes of the day's comparisons, the persistent thoughts that tell you that you should be further along, or that you have mismanaged your time, are losing their grip on your awareness. They are becoming fluid, soft, and distant, like the faint sound of a tide receding through a network of small creeks miles away. You do not need to push against those old habits of thought, and you do not need to follow them into the dark courtrooms of self-judgment. You can simply allow them to exist as small, passing ripples on the surface of your vast internal basin, watching them flatten out and disappear until nothing remains but the unbroken, horizontal peace of your body. This is the quiet restoration of your spirit, the choice to lay down the leather ledger of your losses and step entirely off the wheel of constant self-reinvention. It is the realization that your native value has never been a metric to be calculated or a title to be defended in a loud marketplace. The grand design you once carried was simply a small, rigid cage built by a mind that was terrified of the river's unpredictable turns, a defensive shield that mistook control for safety. By letting that design dissolve into the dark water tonight, you are not failing your potential. You are finally collapsing the painful distance between the life you imagined and the beautiful, unadorned reality of the breath moving through your chest right now. With every slow, unhurried exhalation that leaves your body, feel the remaining sand of your past expectations washing clear through the open slats of your heart. There is no effort required to clear these channels. No striving to achieve an idealized state of inner peace before the sun rises, and no pressure to fix a single aspect of your history tonight. You are simply a living form resting in a quiet room, fully supported by the surface beneath you, and fully embraced by the dense, non-judgmental darkness of the night. The water does not ask for your credentials before it holds you. It does not demand an apology for the seasons your wheel stood still. It simply provides the space for you to lay down your weight and rest. The machinery of your overthinking mind has finally spent its force, its heavy timbers resting peacefully in the dark shallows, completely empty of the historical silt that made it too heavy to turn. You are a clear channel now, an open and simple structure through which the quiet night can flow, without any internal friction or resistance. You do not need to carry your grievances to prove your worth, nor do you need to use shame as a tool to correct your path. You can let the entire day drop away, recognizing that the world will continue to spin without your anxious management, and that you are unconditionally permitted to let your eyes grow heavy and close. As the silence deepens around your bed, the warm weight of your physical form becomes fully integrated with the horizontal peace of the room. The boundaries of your worry are softening into the cool air, leaving behind nothing but a weightless, unburdened presence that is already whole, already safe, and already home. There is nothing left to calculate, nothing left to steer, and absolutely nothing left to solve before the morning arrives. Let yourself drift away into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, sliding effortlessly into the deep, dark expanse of a dreamless and unbroken sleep, fully trusting the current to cradle you exactly as you are. The dark tide of the estuary expands into the edges of the room, a vast and quiet presence that completely dissolves the remaining boundaries of the day. Within this deep, waterlogged stillness, the mind is no longer an operator trying to guide a boat through a dangerous channel. It has become the channel itself, an open, unhindered space through which the night moves without encountering a single obstacle, a single argument, or a single point of rigid resistance. The uncarved willow trunk bobs with a gentle, imperceptible weight in the black shallows, entirely free from the historical burden of what it was cut down to be, completely satisfied to be nothing more than wood resting in the cool, silent brine. Let your awareness sink fully into that weightless, uncalculated space, allowing the final remnants of your internal steering fatigue to wash out through the open slats of your heart. You do not need to look for a shore tonight, nor do you need to guarantee that your voice will feel clear, or your path will feel certain when the morning arrives. The trajectory of your years, the state of your unfinished projects, the standing of your relationships, all of these things can exist exactly as they are right now, completely independent of your anxious analysis. You are safe enough to drop the prosecutorial brief, to close the ledger of your losses, and to let your entire nervous system go completely slack, soft, and open like a plain piece of unspun wool. This is the native sanctuary that has never left you, the pure, untroubled presence that has sat quietly beneath every grand design you tried to construct, and every failure you tried to fix through shame. The Buddha pointed toward this very stillness, not as a distant goal to be reached through decades of striving, but as the basic, unrefined texture of your own consciousness when it stops fighting the direction of the river. You do not have to earn this peace by completing a list of metrics or correcting the perceived missteps of your youth. It is already laid beneath your feet, an immovable reality that supports your weight without asking for a single justification or proof of your value. With every soft, quiet breath that passes through your lips, feel the vast, horizontal peace of the night settling into the deepest chambers of your lungs, soothing the tired tissues and cooling the rough grit of the day's overthinking. The machinery of your mind has fully spent its velocity. The heavy wooden paddles are frozen in the shallows, empty of the silt of past expectations, and completely unbothered by the clear water that glides harmlessly over their frame. You are an empty vessel now, a simple, unadorned structure that requires no defense against the sky and no performance to maintain its place in the world. As the room grows increasingly still, let your mind dissolve entirely into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The day is fully resolved, the creation is at rest, the stone is still, and you are unconditionally permitted to let go of the oars and drift away into the boundless mercy of the dark. There is nothing left to calculate, nothing left to steer, and absolutely nothing left to solve before the morning arrives. And if the home you have been searching for all along, was never located at the end of an idealized destination, but was quietly breathing right here, beneath the very weight you finally chose to drop.